What's up, everybody, and welcome to Itadakimasu, Japanese cuisine with me, your host, Chef Metal. Would like to start off by just introducing myself a little bit. I've been working in the restaurant industry for about 28 years, 14 of which has been spent in Japanese cuisine, ranging from sushi to izakaya and everywhere in between. Today, we're going to be making a couple of staple Japanese dishes just to sort of kick off this show. We're going to be starting off with steamed white rice, miso soup, and then we're gonna follow it into a shrimp and vegetable tempura and finish off with just a super savory beef short rib Japanese golden curry. Thank you all for joining me on this adventure, and I'm looking forward to cooking with you. What's up, everybody? We're gonna start off today with a couple of the staple Japanese dishes for pretty much every meal of the day. Steamed white rice and miso soup. And so with the steamed white rice, we're going to take the dried rice, just sort of add in however much you're going to be using for your meal. And then first step to this that is very, very important is you've got to wash your rice. If you don't wash your rice, you're gonna end up with sort of a sulfury, pungent like aroma and flavor, and nobody wants that. That's just not good eats. So let's give a nice solid wash and rinse. And while you're washing your rice, you wanna make sure that you're firm enough with it to be scrubbing all of the excess starches and whatnots off the outside, but you don't want to be so hard with the rice that you're going to be breaking the individual rice grains. You still want those to be able to maintain their structure. And after you've given it a nice little washing here, we're going to drain out that water. And if you see the water, it's this milky, almost horchata-like color. That means you got a nice, good amount of all of that outside residuals off that rice. And so after you do that, we're just gonna rinse a couple of times to make sure that this rice is nice and clean and tasty. And you can tell that it's rinsed off fully once the milkiness of that water that you're rinsing it with turns more transparent and more clear. And once you've got clear water running, you're good to go. All right, now that we got our rice washed and rinsed, we're going to add the water for cooking. And rule of thumb with rice, you don't need to measure 1 cup of rice to 1.5 cups of water or whatever that may be. However much rice you're using, you're gonna use your index finger to measure the water. You're gonna fill the water up till it comes to that first knuckle above the tip of your finger, of your index finger, over the rice. So we're gonna need a little bit more water in there. Boom, beautiful. So now at this point, we're gonna throw this on the stovetop. We're gonna crank that heat up to high and bring it to a boil. There we go. And as soon as that comes to a boil, we're gonna drop that temperature down to a nice mellow simmer, put a lid on it, and let it go for between 15 and 20 minutes. Once that time frame is up and all of the water has been evaporated and cooked out of that pot, we're gonna kill the heat and let it sit for another 10 to 15 minutes to properly steam. That time will allow all of that moisture in that water to be redistributed evenly throughout the entire batch of rice, and you'll end up with perfect, fluffy, awesome rice. All right, so I'm actually gonna move this rice to this front burner to make it a little bit more accessible for me. In the meantime, while that's cooking, we're gonna move on to our next step in our next dish. We're gonna start making a dashi broth for our miso soup. And a dashi broth is a nice, basic, simple broth using 3 ingredients. We've got dried shiitake mushrooms. We have dried bonito flakes, which are shaved, dried pieces of the bonito fish. And we have kombu, which is a dried Japanese kelp seaweed. So first and foremost, we're gonna get some water in our pot. And while that's filling up, we're gonna make a little sachet using cheesecloth for this dashi. All right. So the purpose behind this little pouch we're going to make for the dashi, we're going to take the bonito flakes and we are going to sort of turn them into a little bit of like a tea bag type scenario so that we don't have little pieces and chunks of the bonito floating in our broth, because we want that broth to be nice and clean in the end of this situation. So you take your chunk of cheesecloth, add in your bonito flakes, and we're going to get ourselves a little piece of butcher's twine to tie it all off and make sure that it's solid and not going to be leaking out. All right. So we're going to take the four corners of the cheesecloth and sort of bring them all together. And then that's going to leave you with four more corners, and you're going to bring all of those in and sort of just pouch it up. Tie your butcher's cloth around nice and tight. And we've got our bonito sachet. So get this water going. We don't want to start on a like already boiling water. We want this all to start from cold water and slowly come up. That way all of the flavors from all of these ingredients that we're adding in slowly come out into that water and create and develop just a beautiful flavor in the end. All right, and so now we're ready to start adding our ingredients to this pot of water. We're gonna start out with the shiitake mushrooms and the kombu seaweed. And we're gonna let that go, and once this comes up to a nice medium simmer, then we're going to add in our bonito flakes and continue from there. But until then, we will move on to the next step of the process. Okay, now that we've got our rice rolling and our dashi broth for our miso soup working, we're gonna move on to the first step of making our Japanese golden curry, which is making a curry roux. We're gonna be starting off with butter. Toss that into a nice hot pan and get that melting out. As that's melting out, we're gonna grab ourselves some all-purpose flour and some utensils to mix with. And we're gonna slowly add our flour in while mixing it and getting it perfectly, smoothly incorporated in with that melting butter. Got a little spillage, but that's all right because it's bound to happen when you're cooking in a kitchen. So, the key behind this roux here is you can make a good amount of it in advance. Instead of having to make this curry roux every single time, you can make yourself a nice large batch and stick it in the freezer in a Ziploc bag, and it will stay good for up to a year. So you can just break off little chunks of it when you feel like making yourself a Japanese style curry instead of having to go back and start the whole process from scratch again. This is one of those things that you can build a large batch of and just sit on it and use it as you see fit throughout the course of the next year. You just got to make sure that you store it in a nice zipped up Ziploc bag in the freezer. And so once you've got all this flour incorporated into your butter mixture, we're going to make sure that we've got this on a medium-low temperature, and we're just going to let that go for about 10 to 15 minutes. And after that, we're going to add in all of our spice mixtures, and then we will let it cool, and it'll be ready for use in the future. We'll be right back. All right, now that we've got a good simmer rolling on our dashi stock and our roux has cooked down and started to deepen in color, we can start taking the next steps on the processes. But first, before that, our rice is, yes, the liquid has all been cooked out, so we're gonna kill the heat And remember, after we kill the heat on the rice, we're just gonna let it sit and steam for 10 to 15 minutes to let all of that moisture redistribute evenly throughout the rice. Now, onto our dashi broth. This is the moment in time, since we've got a good simmer rolling, that we're gonna drop in our little sachet of bonito flakes that we made earlier. We're just gonna sort of drop those in and make sure they get tucked down into the water. And we're gonna let this simmer for another about 10 minutes before it will be ready to use. And onto the curry roux. Like I said, we've got a nice dark golden color happening now in here. So this is the moment in time that we're gonna start adding all of our spices to this to make it a curry roux and not just a regular roux. So I like to use an SMB brand Oriental curry powder for the beginning baseline flavor profile of this curry, but then to make it a true Japanese style curry, there's a few extras that I like to add in, which is about a tablespoon of garam masala, just a pinch of granulated garlic, about a tablespoon of turmeric, and then about a half of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, just to give it a nice little zip at the end. So we're gonna start it by adding in our S&B Asian curry powder. And I'm doing about 2 tablespoons for a half a pound of butter and a half a cup of all-purpose flour. And we're gonna give that a nice mix, make sure it all gets incorporated. Yeah, there we go. And now we're gonna add in the rest of those spices I just listed. Gonna mix those in nicely. And then once we've got all of this incorporated, all of these ingredients incorporated, we're gonna let it simmer just to allow all of the flavors and aromas from all of those dried spices that we just added in to really develop and really mix well together. And from there, we get to take it off the heat and let it cool into our curry roux block. So while this simmers and does its magic, we're gonna take a little break and we'll be right back. All right, we're back, everybody, and our miso's dashi broth has finished its process. We've got a nice color and all of those aromas and flavors are gonna be jam-packed in there. So first off, what we're gonna do is just sort of remove all of these ingredients that we used to create these layers of flavor. Our kombu, our shiitake mushrooms can all come out of here. And then what we're gonna end up doing is we're gonna end up reserving a couple of cups of this dashi broth, and we are going to add in the short rib bones that we trimmed off of our beef short ribs for the curry, and we're gonna end up making a beef stock with the dashi as the base to use in our Japanese curry dish a little bit later. So now that we've got all of the stuff out of there, we're gonna pull a couple of cups worth of the dashi, and we're going to use that a little bit later, so we'll just set it off to the side. Now that we've got our nice, clean, cleared out dashi broth, simply enough, the only step left is to add our white miso paste. And so shiro miso, you can find it at about any Asian market, and it comes in a paste form. This is a fermented soybean paste, and it's just jam-packed full of umami and saltiness. It's got all of those flavors. I mean, whenever you go out to sushi, that first thing you smell when you step into the restaurant is that dashi with the miso. It's just got such a unique aroma and flavor profile. It's absolutely beautiful. So we're gonna hit that with our miso paste. So to give that a nice little stir, at this point in time, we are going to completely kill the heat because you don't want to kill the flavor of the miso. Excess heat is gonna like sort of dumb down that miso flavor. It's gonna sort of cook it out and kill it. So as soon as you're ready to add in that miso, make sure that you turn the heat on that dashi broth completely off. go. That's looking beautiful. All right, and so before we serve our miso, now that it's all cooked and ready, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna prepare a little bit of accoutrement, a little bit of additions, texture and flavor-wise for this miso. It's pretty basic and very traditional for Japanese miso soup. We're gonna use extra firm tofu. You want the extra firm tofu because it's gonna hold its shape and it's gonna give a nice bouncy texture to the broth. I'm gonna take this and just make a little slice and cut this into nice little cubes. And then we're gonna take our scallions, our green onions, take one of these guys out of here. And if you're buying produce from stores, always make sure that you give it a good rinse before you use it. I mean, you just never know what's been, where those vegetables have been. Anyways, for these scallions, we're just gonna be using the green tops for this, and you're just gonna slice them nice and thin. And you don't need a lot, because as soon as add that hot miso soup to the green onions, it'll just bring all those oils, aromas, and flavors right out. You don't need a lot of them, just a little bit to add that little bit of a bite, that little extra flavor, aroma, and texture to your miso soup. So in order to serve this up, we're just gonna take a little bit of that extra firm tofu that we diced up, place that in the bottom of the bowl. We're gonna take those scallions, we're gonna place those right on top of that tofu, and we're gonna come in here, and you gotta remember, every time that you go to serve up some miso soup, the miso paste will end up sort of conglomerating on the bottom. So you just give it a quick little stir around, and that'll make sure that all that miso paste is mixed in nicely with the dashi broth, and you're getting all of those flavors that you're looking for. And we're just gonna scoop that right over the top of that tofu and those green onions. Our first dish, classic staple with every Japanese meal, homemade miso soup. Thank you so much, and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back everybody. It's time to move on to the next steps in the process of our Japanese golden curry. So our curry roux has beautifully finished off here. We've got a nice, dark, aromatic mixture, and we are going to take this now and remove it from the heat. You want to find yourself a nice, flat, large dish to pour this all into, where it's going to create a nice, thin, even layer. We're going to take this curry roux and stick it in the fridge. That way it can cool and solidify, and we will have this nice block of curry roux that we can take whatever size pieces of that we need for whatever dishes we want to make in the future. We can move on to the next step, or the next two actually. We can do two of these things at once. Now that we've got our dashi broth set aside, we can sort of add and infuse a nice beefy flavor to that using the bones and the trim from the short ribs that we're going to be using in this beef curry. And at the same point in time, going to add a little bit of oil to this large pan, and we can start caramelizing some sweet onions to really build a depth of flavor in this curry. Let's see. Oh, that's a beautiful sizzle. You want that pan to be nice and hot to get those onions rolling. As soon as you throw those sweet onions into a hot pan with some oil, you start getting those aromas. It's just a beautiful thing. It's something that can't be replicated. Now that that's going, we're gonna hit a little bit of oil into our pot for our beef stock, and we're gonna throw our bones and our scraps directly into there. And we're gonna brown these bones and scraps off a little bit before we add in the dashi. That's gonna help to draw out some of those flavors and aromas of the beef bones and scrap and help it infuse a lot faster into that dashi broth. Those are the sounds we love to hear. All right. So with the caramelization of these onions, we want it to be nice and hot at the very beginning, but as soon as you start seeing a little bit of browning happening on those onions, we're gonna turn this heat down to a nice medium temperature. If you got a like 1 to 9 range on your scales, turn it down to a 4.5 to 5. That'll be right around the point that you're gonna want that heat at. And you're just gonna occasionally come through and stir the onions, making sure that they're not sticking and burning to the bottom of the pan. But other than that, we just wanna let those things sit and go low and slow until all of the sugars get drawn out from the heat. And that's what creates the caramelization. All right, now that we've got a nice little browning on these bones, we're just gonna add in the dashi stock that we reserved from our miso soup a little earlier. Give that a mix. And then once again, once you've got that dashi stock in there, we're just gonna turn this down to a nice medium heat and let it simmer. Both of these items are gonna take about 10 to 15 minutes until they're at their perfect point to start the next step of the process. I'm really looking forward to finishing off this curry because I think you guys are really gonna enjoy just the flavors and textures of this dish. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back everybody. We've given these onions a good amount of time to get nice and caramelized and all of the sugars to be brought out. So the next step on this, we're gonna take our cut up beef short rib, we're gonna get this temperature cranked up a little bit, and we're gonna give a nice hard sear to this beef short rib before we start adding in the rest of the ingredients and the liquids. And you might have noticed, instead of using spatulas and things like that, I've got this pair of chopsticks here. Not only is it sort of the utensil most commonly used for cooking in Japan for most dishes, but these chopsticks themselves hold a little significance to me personally. They were brought over from Japan by my grandmother when I was 3 years old, and she taught me how to use them over the course of the next couple of years. And when she passed, I decided that it's about time for these to go into my knife bag and become a part of my daily cooking process so that no matter how long it's been, I can always be cooking with Grandma. Because let's be honest, like cooking and eating with family, I mean, it's one of the greatest parts of life, man. Like sharing those moments and sharing that time. Now that we've got this beef searing, we're gonna get ready to add in couple more ingredients. We've got some nice little baby marble golden potatoes that I've peeled and then cut in half. They've been soaking in water. Good thing about soaking your potatoes in water is that it's gonna stop them from oxidizing and turning brown because, I mean, it's not really gonna change the flavor much, but appearance is a really big part of food, you know? You want that food to look appetizing and look tasty. And if you've got some oxidizing potatoes in the mix, not gonna be the most appetizing look. So you soak those things in some water while you're waiting to use them, and it keeps them just that beautiful golden fresh color. Gonna add those guys in. And now we've got these carrots here. A lot of them are already pre-cut, but I just sort of wanted to show you guys how I cut these because it's kind of a unique style of cutting to get this particular shape. This is called a roll cut. Carrots already been rinsed and peeled. You're gonna start off at the bottom and just sort of take off that bottom little tip. We're gonna take these carrots, and as soon as you take that little tip off, you're gonna roll it about 90 degrees and find where that cut was that you made, and you're just gonna make another cut up from there. And then roll it 90 degrees, cut, roll 90, cut, roll 90, cut, and just do that all the way up, and you'll end up with this very unique and visually appealing shape of your carrot. We're gonna add these guys in now and start getting those sauteed down a little bit. And now you can see this dish starting to come together and looking like a nice, hearty, rich home-style meal. You got your beef, your potatoes, your carrots, your onions. What gets more home-style cooking than that? An extra little thing that really makes Japanese curry special is we're gonna add some finely grated Fuji apple, and that's gonna bring in an extra little bit of a sweetness that's gonna help to balance out all of these salty and savory and fatty and rich flavors. It's gonna help to bring them all together and just create an absolute explosion of amazing flavors on your taste buds. So we'll start by peeling out an apple, and we're gonna get our cuts from this guy. And then from here, we're gonna take a microplane. If you don't have a microplane, you can use like a cheese grater on the smallest little grated setting that you've got, and that'll work out just fine. But we're just gonna sort of grate this apple into our dish, nice and fresh. All right, now that that's grated in there, we'll sort of mix it all around nicely. So at this point in time, we're just about at the final steps before this needs to just low and slow simmer for a while. We are going to take that beef stock that we made a little bit earlier with the short rib bones and the dashi broth from the miso soup, and we're just going to sort of add that in. Give it a good mix. And now comes the curry roux. It's had time to chill, and so we'll be able to just sort of cut a couple of blocks out of this stuff. Oh, and you end up with this nice little block. And you can take these and cut them up, put them in a Ziploc bag, stick them in your freezer, and you have it made for next time you want to make a little bit of Japanese curry. But we're gonna add a few of these guys into our pot, mix it all up. This curry roux will slowly melt out, and as this dish simmers, the curry roux will help to like thicken, create this nice, thick, creamy, rich, gravy-like texture, and that's our sauce for the dish. So we're gonna let this simmer for about 25 to 30 minutes on a very low heat. That'll make sure that the potatoes are cooked through and that the beef is nice and tender and ready to go. So once that finishes out, we'll be right back to plate. Welcome back, everyone. We are going to jump onto making some tempura from scratch here. All right. First things first, you got to start out with getting all your ingredients for a tempura batter together, which this is the most basic, simplistic tempura batter that you're ever going to see. 3 ingredients: all-purpose flour, potato starch. You can substitute cornstarch if you can't find potato starch, and it'll do just fine. And then, key to this, ice water. It's got to be super cold, and you're gonna actually want to have a few ice cubes mixed into the batter to keep that temperature low, because you want that batter temperature to be cold. When you drop it into the hot oil, it's gonna cause a reaction of the temperatures colliding that's gonna make that batter like pop and spread and burst, and that's what's gonna give you that nice, light, textural, crispy tempura batter in the end. So now that we've got all of the ingredients for our batter ready, we are going to go through the vegetables and other things we're gonna be using to make this tempura. So it's summertime right now. This is a Japanese pepper called a shishito pepper, and this is sort of the season for it. They're super tasty and more easily available to find at this point in time of the year. It's slightly sweet and mild on the spicy pepper. Maybe 1 in 100 of these will actually have like a spicy kick to them, but the vast majority, they're very mild spice level, very flavorful. They've got almost a floral type of a flavor to them, so I love using these things for tempura. we're going to be using a little bit of scallion, green onion to tempura, and the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to take sort of that outer layer off, make sure that it's all nice and crisp. We're going to cut off the green of this, and now with mostly the white and a little bit of the light green part left, we're going to make a couple of cuts. So if you'd like to see this happen, we're going to leave about 1 inch of the bottom white uncut, but then we're going to cut in the middle all the way up to the top, and then we're going to roll that 90 degrees and do the same thing all the way through, right about in the middle of the scallion, and cut it all the way up. What this is going to do is it's going to separate all these layers of this green onion base, and then once we flour it, dip it in our batter, and drop it into the fryer, that's all going to sort of spread out and create a really cool visual appearance of all of these layers like opening up. So we'll do this with a couple of these onions. All right, so now I've got our shishito peppers and our green onions. Gonna do a little tempura carrot. These are things that you can find any time of year at any grocery store, nice and easy to get. So we're gonna cut off a little section of it, and then we're gonna make some nice little slices out of that guy. And so we've got our little carrot slices, and we're gonna take a little bit of this sweet onion, and we're just gonna cut the top off of it there, and then peel it, get all that skin off. And now for the bottom, where it's connected by these roots, we are going to very carefully just cut the roots off, because we want this to be able to maintain sticking together and not just fall apart layer by layer. And that root base right there sort of has a core that sort of keeps the entire onion connected with each slice. So we're gonna sort of take off that edge and get to where that root core is. And then we're just gonna make a couple of slices of our onion like that. So now we've got our carrots, our shishito peppers, our green onion, and our sweet onion, all ready to be floured, battered, and fried. Now that we've got our mise en place set up with the vegetables, I'm gonna come over to the refrigerator here, and I'm gonna pull out a couple of shrimp. So, if you've ever gone to a Japanese restaurant before and ordered tempura shrimp, you will recognize that they're always long, straight shrimp. If you've ever wondered how you make that happen, because shrimp are naturally sort of curled around like this, I'm gonna show you how you turn this into this. And it just takes a little bit of knife work. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your shrimp and take your knife, and on the inside curl of the shrimp, you're gonna very carefully make horizontal incisions all the way down the center of that shrimp. And then you're gonna turn it over, and you're gonna do the same thing on the back side. And make sure that you make very shallow incisions. If you go too deep, then the shrimp is going to like break off and fall apart and not maintain like this whole long shape. Now that you've got the incisions on the bottom and the top end, you'll see that it sort of sits out flat. You're gonna take the flat end of your knife and just lightly tap it out. Flip it over, lightly tap it out, and you end up with a nice straightened shrimp ready for tempura. All right, let's get into the process of actually making this stuff crispy and ready to eat. We've got our potato starch and all-purpose flour mixture. We are going to add our ice cold water into that with ice cubes and everything. Mix, 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 mix. And While you're making this batter, slowly adding the water in to get the proper texture and consistency, the lightest, crispiest tempura is gonna come from a thinner batter, a more watery, runny batter. And if you want to use the batter thicker, it's gonna end up being more of like a beer batter type consistency. It's not really gonna be as light and crispy, it's gonna be a little bit heavier. But to each their own, it's all sort of personal preference. I prefer my tempura in more of the traditional Japanese style, very light, very crispy. And so I like to go with a nice, thin, watery batter. All right, it's coming along. Once you've got that mixed up, and with this mixing, you don't need to get it mixed completely smooth, completely perfect. It actually sort of helps if you have little globs of dried flour and potato starch in there, because once those pop in the oil, they're gonna help create that like spread out crispy texture as well as the temperature being low. All right, before you start frying, always make sure you've got some sort of a rack. So once you're done with frying one, you can pull it out and it can drip and not sit there in a puddle of oil, and it can get nice and cooled off and ready to eat. And before you fry anything or batter anything, you're always gonna want to make sure that you give it a nice, we'll start with the shrimp here. Give it a nice little dip just in some all-purpose flour. If you're gluten-free, you can always use rice flour or gluten-free flour in place of the AP. Yeah, now that you're floured, we're gonna just sort of dredge this in some of this tempura batter right here. And with these shrimp, since we wanna keep them nice and straight, what we're gonna do is as we drop them into the oil, we're just gonna wiggle them back and forth a little bit. Get that outside fried so that it doesn't stick to the bottom. Gonna drop those guys in. You can always use your chopsticks here to sort of straighten out any type of a little bit of a curl that they might have gotten. We're gonna add a little bit more texture now that we've got these in here with their initial fry. We're gonna dip our fingers in to the batter, and we're just gonna sort of drizzle and splash that extra batter over the tops of these shrimp as they're cooking. And that's gonna sort of add a little bit more texture and a little bit more crunch to the end result product. All right, these things are starting to look pretty. Now, while those are cooking, we'll grab one of these nice little green onions. We'll get that, same process, get it floured, drop it into this batter, and we'll drop that straight in. These shrimp are looking nice and crispy. Gonna pull these guys out. Beautiful. Let's get a carrot going in the mix. And a couple of these nice shishito peppers. Again, just nice little flour dusting first. Drop them into our batter. Drop them into our hot oil. Get a little bit of this, give it some flicks, create that texture. Now grab our sticks and give a little turnover. Beautiful. And now while this is finishing up, we're gonna get this little side over here rolling, and we're gonna make a quick little tempura dipping sauce for once this tempura is finished out. 3 ingredients. Got a little bit of that dashi broth that we made for the miso soup earlier. A little bit of that stuff saved out. We're gonna add that in. And then mirin, which is a sweet cooking sake. You can find it any Asian market, and nowadays you can even find this at several like regular big chain grocery stores. Make sure these are going, beautiful. And we're just gonna add in a little splash of that mirin, and then a little splash of soy sauce. And we're gonna bring this up to a boil, and it'll be ready to serve with our tempura shrimp and vegetables. Beautiful. Green onion, let that oil drain. Shishito peppers, let that oil drain. Carrot, let that oil drain. And as you can see, we're already up to a boil here on this, so it's time to plate up. Kill the heat on this dipping sauce. Grab a plate for our tempura. We have tempura shrimp and vegetables with a nice savory umami-packed dipping sauce to go along with it. Thank you so much, and once we come back, we'll get on with finishing out our curry. We'll see you soon. All right, everybody, welcome back. It's time to finish off this show with the seasoning and plating of our beef short rib Japanese golden curry. Now that we've got that nice, long, slow simmer done on this golden curry, it's time to season. The reason we don't season beforehand is because the potatoes would suck up all of that salt, and then you'd have super salty potatoes and bland everything else, and nobody wants that. So now that we're about to serve, we're gonna hit a couple little pinches of nice sea salt, and we're gonna hit it with a little splash of soy sauce to add just that extra depth of umami, because this dish is supposed to be an umami bomb. All right, get that all mixed in thoroughly. We've got this nice thick gravy-like Japanese golden curry sauce, and that is exactly what we're gunning for. And after you're done seasoning, always got to give it a taste. Make sure that you got it on point. Ooh, that's what we're looking for, folks. That's exactly what we're looking for. So now we're gonna plate this up. Gonna grab some of that steamed rice that we made earlier. Nice and fluffy. We're going to load that up to a little cup, just so that we can get a nice little shape, give it a very light, gentle pack down. Gonna come over here, throw that directly onto the corner of one of our plates. Comes out in that nice little dome shape. It's time to get some of this curry going. And we're just gonna make sure that we load this plate up with all of that goodness, those chunks of beef short rib, these beautiful golden potatoes, those nice carrots, the sweet caramelized onions. All of this stuff is what makes this dish what it is. And we've got to make sure that there's enough to go around. And then a good finish for this dish to give it a nice bright fresh flavor and a little pop of extra color. Take a little bit of your scallions and just give those greens a nice little cut through. And we're just gonna sort of give that a nice little sprinkle over the top. And there you have it, folks. Beef short rib Japanese golden curry. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, thank you for joining me on today's episode of Itadakimasu Japanese Cuisine with Chef Metal. Today we put together miso soup, tempura shrimp and vegetables with a nice umami-packed dipping sauce, and then a traditional Japanese beef short rib golden curry. So stoked to have you guys on, and I hope to see you the next time around. Until then, sayonara.